Hello there, comrades. Based on the title and thumbnail of this video, you might assume that I am adequately prepared to discuss this topic, but I can assure you that is not the case. I am going to attempt to discuss this anyways. And the good news is I'm not going to be discussing this topic alone. A big part of why I want to make this video is because I want to look at a comment that was left on one of my videos almost a year ago now. And the reason why I want to look at this comment now is because I find it to be especially relevant considering where we're at post-US election. First things first, if you are new to the channel, I want to be completely transparent and just throw it out there that I am, in fact, a communist. Now you know. What this means is I do not support either of the two corporate parties who run the United States. If you are somebody who thought that Biden and Harris are communists, I can assure you, as an actual communist, they are not communists. They are classic capitalist, greedy liberals, okay? And also, if you thought for some reason that as a communist I would support Trump, you are absolutely incorrect. I'm sorry, but you are so incorrect. But at least we have this in common. Whoever you are, whichever half of the corporate ruling class you hate, I'm with you. If you hate the Democrats, I'm right there with you. If you hate the Republicans, I'm right there with you. The difference between you and me is that I don't use my hatred of one of the corporate parties to justify supporting the other corporate party. They are both bad. They are both owned by corporations and billionaires who fund their campaigns and as a result have control over them. Neither party represents the working class. Both parties divide the working class on manufactured culture war issues. Most of the things that we argue about online or with our friends and loved ones at holiday get-togethers are completely manufactured to keep working people apart. As a communist, I view our society in the United States as the working class versus the exploiting class. The exploiting class could also be called the capitalist class. The capitalist class is the private individuals and corporations who own the means of production and therefore are able to exploit the workers because we have to sell our labor to them to create profit for them. In doing so, our whole existence essentially becomes working our lives away to fund a private utopia for the rich. And I am opposed to that. I am opposed to this current system in which the entire working class has the profits that they create stolen from them. They have their wages stolen from them and given to the people on the top who didn't do the work, but just happened to be in the position of ownership. That's kind of where I'm at, so I just can't emphasize enough that I really reject these manufactured culture wars. My best example of how the government manufactures culture wars is this. During COVID, the Republicans and the Democrats worked together to create two big culture war issues for all of us to fight about. Maybe you remember them. They were wearing masks and getting vaccines. While we all were arguing about the benefits of wearing masks or the benefits of getting some shots, corporations saw record profits and working class people were entirely screwed over. Do we remember how that happened and we all just sort of let it happen because the mask issue was more important or the vaccine issue was more important than the fact that the corporations were stealing record profits from the workers, from us? From the majority? That's something that the comment that we're about to look at actually mentions, is that when you look at the world from the perspective of the class divide of the working class and the exploiting class, you realize that the working class is massive. We are the majority, and the exploiting class is the minority. But using their wealth, power, and influence, they have set up a system in which they control the government. They get to choose who gets elected through their massive donations and campaign fundings. And then the government serves them instead of serving the working people. Editing Brandon here, just to emphasize that the reason why the exploiting class has created the two-party system and manufactured so many culture war issues is to blind us to the fact that as the working class, we have so much in common and we outnumber them so much. And because there's only two parties, there's no option for us to break out of that system. The third party candidates get abysmally low numbers of votes. I know. I was a third party voter. I voted Green Party in this election. I'm sorry, but neither of the two corporate parties represents me, and I don't really buy into this idea of harm reduction voting in a capitalist voting system. I don't think that there's harm reduction. I think that it's manufactured to make you think that there's harm reduction. What was I saying? I feel like I've completely lost the plot on a little random tangent about that. Hey, as I warned you I wasn't going to be prepared for this, okay? Oh yes, I actually believe I was talking about the class divide. So as far as I'm concerned, the majority, which would be the working class, should have final say and control over the things that the government imposes upon us, right? And this idea of working class representation in a capitalist government where only the rich seem to even be able to run, or those who promise to represent the rich seem to be able to win, we don't really have a say. We don't have a say in any of the layers, it seems like. It becomes increasingly less so, because people get into politics not to represent the working class, but to enrich themselves and push further their careers. It's just a really, really crummy, scummy system. Look, I am somebody who has been really frustrated for the past year about the genocide of the Palestinians. If you want to argue that it's not a genocide or that Zionism is a good thing, I invite you to watch this video that I made months ago now, which captures on the ground footage of what is happening in Gaza. The fact is that Gaza is one of the most well-documented genocides in history, okay? Because everybody has a phone, everybody has cameras. You can't hide it from the people anymore. All that you can do is pretend it's not happening, which is what our government has been doing. And if you believe our government, you might fall into that trap of thinking that it isn't a genocide, but I can assure you that it is. And the fact is, this has been a completely Democrat-run, Democrat-led, funded, and armed genocide. And a lot of people were trying to push this campaign that Harris was going to be better for the Palestinians than Trump was. And I would simply say to that there is no diet genocide. There is no genocide light. There is no lesser genocide than genocide. And we're already at genocide. We've seen the slaughter of over 40,000 people. Something like almost half of them have been children. According to Lancet, a conservative estimate of the death toll could be as high as 186,000 when counting indirect deaths compared to other recent conflicts. We're talking about 186,000 dead. We're talking about land being stolen. We're talking about what, like over 50% of their buildings and infrastructure has been demolished, is just gone. All of that under Biden and Harris. And you want to pretend that Trump is going to somehow be worse? That there's still like a going back point? No, comrade. We are locked into genocide. And we have been. This is what I'm saying when I'm saying that both parties are bad. And I need you to understand this. The party that loves to pretend to be morally superior, that's like the main thing that the Democrats run on, is that they're morally superior than the Republicans, is that they care about the LGBTQIA plus community and they care about people of color, marginalized communities, immigrants, all of that stuff. It's just not true. It's a lie. Look at how many children in Gaza they have slaughtered. And the reason why I feel like I have to hammer this home and specifically talk trash at the Democrats is because they love to paint themselves as the morally superior party. And it's just not true when they won't actually do anything to better the conditions of the working class in this world. The Republicans ran a campaign on fear-mongering about immigrants. Trump was able to look at Biden's version of the United States and say, yeah, people are struggling. Biden's over here bragging about Bidenomics and people are struggling, so I'm going to highlight that and I'm going to blame it on immigrants. And that's just a really, really crummy strategy. The real reason why Bidenomics doesn't work is because of the contradictions of capitalism. But Trump can't say that because Trump is a billionaire who represents other billionaires. So Trump uses immigrants as a scapegoat to unite his base around a perceived enemy. Fun fact, some of the first books that the Nazis burned were about gay and trans people. I just watched Wicked last night. Honestly, I feel like Wicked is just a massive commentary on communism, right? Elphaba's the communist. It's essentially we have to create an enemy because people love an enemy to rally around. And they created a green scare. It's literally Red Scare commentary, folks. It's the green scare. Go watch Wicked. It's really fun. What? I told you I was not prepared to discuss this topic. Leave me alone. I do anticipate that if we see anything under Trump's presidency, it will be maybe a bit more oppression of specific groups of people here in the US, which sucks, right? I'm talking specifically probably the LGBTQIA plus community, maybe even more specifically trans people will be more oppressed. Women will be more oppressed. We've already seen that very hateful, very cringe, your body, my choice rhetoric coming from some of the worst people online. That's definitely concerning. I think that the oppression of immigrants is going to be devastating. It's going to be harder for us here at home. However, we are not at any point, I don't think, going to start being bombed by the US like Gaza is experiencing. So we need to keep in mind that we are still privileged because we live in the heart of the empire. We don't have the fear and the terror, the horror of not knowing when the bombs are going to fall on us, that is something we can't even really fathom, which is why it's so easy to normalize it when it happens to children in Palestine. And I'm telling us, we need to wake up here. We need to really, really consider what it might feel like to be living in tents because your home and all of your possessions was destroyed, and then to have bombs dropping on you who knows when. To feel like you're not safe in any hospital or church or school because those get targeted and bombed. To not have access to anesthesia when you are getting a limb amputated. Can you imagine what that might feel like? Can you imagine being a child and experiencing that? Can you maybe at least imagine for me why Hamas would be resisting a apartheid regime that is committing these atrocities and has been for the past 75 years as a colonial imperial force? All that being said, I want to be clear that I was not just a single issue voter over the Palestine issue. I distinctly take issue with the fact that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are putting in any effort to end poverty. There are clear ties between poverty and crime rates going up because when people live in poverty, they are living in desperation. And when people are desperate, they will turn to any means to try to eke out a living, and that creates crime right there. But neither politicians, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans, are willing to address and try to end poverty. Neither of them are willing to address and try to end homelessness. Neither of them are willing to address and try to end hunger and starvation. It's not just one thing for me, it's everything. Because every single thing that these two corporate parties do is to serve corporations and to serve warmongers and war profiteers. And I don't stand for that. Quite simply. Anyways, I feel like I've yapped for way too long and I need to actually look at this comment that was left on one of my videos. This comment was originally posted entirely in Chinese, assumably from China. This comment was in response to somebody else who was kind of talking about how they wish that in China they could have elections like we have in the US, and this commenter gave some pushback to that, which I think is valid. I should also mention this, that this is just translated by Google. It's probably not perfect, so just remember that this is like a robot's translation of Chinese, not a real person's. There are indeed some people in the country who envy elections and a higher level of freedom. This is the result of a lack of deeper thinking. I dare not say that what I said is definitely right, so let's talk about it rationally. Different political parties take turns running the country, which means that this society must be divided. If the interests of these two parties were aligned, there would be no need for them to exist. In order to attract voters, the two political parties emphasize different characteristics. This kind of behavior is artificially dividing society. As a result, policies are often not continued, and the policies and projects of the previous government may be delayed or changed by this government. There are even more drawbacks to electing leaders. All the information you have about candidates is filtered and not true. You basically know nothing about this person's ability to govern and his moral level. All you see is superficial stuff, and performative personalities and people who are willing to write blank checks tend to get elected because they are more likely to please voters. The people selected are often less capable of governing the country. Competitors will often use all kinds of dirty tricks to expose their shortcomings and make ugly appearances. In the end, voters can only choose one of these rotten people to complete the process or game without excellence. I mean, yeah, I don't think that this sentence was perfectly translated, but I think that it's a very good point that you end up with the choice between one of two rotten people. I think that we did see that in this last election. Everyone tends to think that they are smart and want to participate in the governance of the country. At the worst, they have to find an agent to protect their own interests, but these are just beautiful fantasies. I'm assuming that that's just the robot translating, not making much sense, but I still appreciate it. Elections are not a democratic means to protect the interests of the majority, and I will emphasize that this person is talking about the majority in terms of the working class. Take the Taiwan election as an example. There are more than 19 million voters, a turnout rate of 70%, and a final vote rate of 40%. If counted as all voters, the vote rate is only about 28%. Please tell me, is this democracy where the minority obeys the majority? It can be said that under normal circumstances, the turnout rate in an election is 70%, and a political party must obtain at least 70% of the votes to meet the standard of the minority obeying the majority. majority. I think this is maybe making a good point about the fact that even in a society where voting happens, a lot of the country doesn't vote. Like Trump won, but he didn't win because half of the country voted for him. Half of the country didn't vote, so then maybe like a quarter of them voted for him, or a little more than a quarter. But still, that's not necessarily the representation of the majority of people, I would assume. Finally, elections cost a lot of money, so political parties need a lot of donors. There is no free lunch in the world. Once the new government is established, it must formulate policies that are in line with the donors, and the leaders cannot restrict the donors. As for the interests of ordinary people, they are often ignored because they are a human resource for capitalists and politicians and do not play an important role in elections. The establishment of a government often becomes a kind of politics of division, and those who guard each department are most likely not based on their respective professional abilities, but on the distribution of interests. This is so good. This is so well said. The politicians have to represent the donors, and therefore the donors control the politicians and are basically free from the rule of law. And when you have a group like AIPAC donating heavily to both sides, suddenly it might make a bit more sense why we can't seem to call what's happening to the Palestinians a genocide. But also even beyond that, you can recognize how when somebody like Elon Musk gives millions upon millions of dollars to Trump, he's doing that so that he gets to run the country and be above the law. Same thing is happening with the Democrats. Don't get it twisted. The Democrats have their corporate donors as well. China is not perfect, but Chinese culture has been passed down for thousands of years and must have inherent vitality. This vitality lies in the cultural identity that prioritizes social interests. We don't have the full context there because I'm not going to read the whole comment that that person was replying to. I will link the video below. Maybe you can find the comment and read it for yourself. And I would agree with them that China is not perfect. I would say China is far from perfect. However, it is probably better than the US. I do think that it's cool to get a perspective from somebody who's outside of this system. Maybe that's the benefit of reading that comment. I get that maybe there's a lot of fear-mongering about China in the United States that might make you unwilling to listen to a comment from somebody from China. I do get that. I was raised to be very fearful of China, and it was only when I visited China, which I've done twice now, that I was able to see that, like, oh my gosh, what is the United States talking about? What are they on about? I think there are some great points here that point out the flaws, the inherent flaws, the contradictions of the two-party system. You could ask, what is the solution to that? Because a lot of people are going to hear one-party state and get really freaked out by that too. And I get that, especially in our political world. When you envision a one-party state, you would envision either one party completely controlled by Republicans or one party completely controlled by Democrats. And either one of those scenarios would be astronomically bad. At this point in the United States, our culture, our society, our government, it's all geared towards serving capital and serving capitalists. It's not geared towards serving working class people. It's geared towards rewarding intense greed. So that's the initial problem. That's what needs to be addressed right now. I mean, look at what just recently happened with that CEO getting shot. The working people are celebrating. For once in our lives, we're recognizing that this is a class divide, not a culture war divide. That has been one of the most exciting things that we've seen, I feel like, in recent years. There's recognition here on the right and the left that we're all getting collectively screwed by the people on the top. And that incident really revealed that, I think, to a lot of people. That's good. That represents maybe a shift in our priorities. That represents maybe a shift away from greed and a focus on empathy. Maybe we're starting to realize that people matter more than corporate profit, and all those things would just be wonderful. That would be great. That would be highly beneficial for the majority of people in the United States. We have to get past this idea that our half of the corporate ruling class is going to save us from the other half of the corporate ruling class. The problem is the entire corporate ruling class. And there's no chance of us getting a one-party solution under either of these corporate parties. We need a working class party controlled by the working class, representing the working class, representing the majority. That's the only way that that would work. In terms of really simple solutions that I think would make things a lot better for us in our current circumstances, in our capitalist, imperialist world that we're in, I think that ranked choice voting would be huge. I think that having more than two parties be equally represented in debates and in campaigning would be huge. I think we have to somehow take corporate donors out of campaigning and just give everybody equal airtime in just terms of fairness. But then there has to be a push for the working class to be reconciled. There has to be a push to bring the people back together, to help us recognize that we aren't enemies with each other and that the people that we're being told to hate are good, normal people. It's really, really shady to try to lump people into groups and then frame those whole groups of people as inherently evil. I don't like that at all. And I think that should be obvious to everybody that that is propaganda. If you have a president telling you that all immigrants are bad or that trans people are bad, that is clearly propaganda to make you hate the existence of your fellow humans. And we shouldn't be giving into that. And before you try to call me out and say, but Brandon, you're lumping the entire exploiting class into one group and then telling everybody to hate them, I need to emphasize that there is indeed a difference. There's a difference between trying to spread propaganda that we should be hating a group of people because of who they intrinsically are, like if we're talking about immigrants or people of color or members of the LGBTQIA+ community, that is very, very different from being opposed to the exploiting class, because members of the exploiting class can choose to stop exploiting working people at any point. You can choose to stop being a warmonger. You can choose to stop being a war profiteer. You can choose to stop exploiting the working class. You can choose to stop forcing people into wage slavery. You can choose to stop funding genocide. You can choose to abandon your individual greed. You can choose to value human life over your corporate profits. You can choose to stop being a CEO of a health insurance company. Or it can be chosen for you by the people. What I'm trying to say is I do believe that there is a very clear difference between the propaganda that we are fed by the two-party machine to keep us hating other working class people and the reality that we live in as a working class opposed to the class that exploits us. The class that exploits us could choose to be part of the working class at any point, and we could share the means of production. And also good luck with all these tariffs. I hope that we can find our empathy and that we don't swing the more fascistic route. Good luck out there. Stay strong, free Palestine, stop the genocide, stop the warmongers and the profiteers, stop the health insurance CEOs. Stand together. Stop letting us be divided by them and start making them afraid of us. Yeah. Oh gosh, I hope I said everything I needed to. I don't know. Thank you. As our material conditions worsen under capitalism, you are going to find yourself increasingly having more in common materially with people that you have been told by the ruling class to hate. This is by design. They want you to hate the people that you have the most in common with so that you fight them instead of the people that are plunging both you and the people you're supposed to hate into poverty for the sake of wealth hoarding.